Hi all. This video is going to demonstrate how to use mtgmulligan.com to find mulligan strategies for a specific deck. The first thing I'm going to do is toggle this information button, which is going to hide all of the explanations. It just makes the website visually appear better for this demonstration. The explanations cover the same thing I'm going to talk about today. So let's take a look at some of the tools it has to offer, sort of in a summary view first. This is the deck list. Pretty straightforward deck list entry. There's 60 cards in it. The featured deck here is Prowess Deck Wins. Then we go over to the Sorted Hands tab, and note that deck list hasn't been lost. We go to the Sorted Hands tab, and this has random opening hands of different sizes, and they've been sorted by me from worst to best. So you start here with, this is the worst hand we drew, and you scroll all the way down, and you'll find, and there are 80 of them, you'll find that this is the best hand in this particular sort. There's 80 hands right now in the sort, 20 each of 7, 6, 5, and 4. Generating this list is good for the user because it gets you drawing random hands and comparing them in context to what the deck is capable of producing. So it gets you very familiar with looking at opening hands, and producing this list is necessary for the site's algorithm to determine an optimal mulligan strategy, which comes in this next tab, Analysis. So this is sort of the output of the process. And I'm going to use the zoom button to sort of zoom out one click. This is the mulligan rate and worst hand to keep of every hand size. So, for example, for the 7-card hand, the mulligan strategy that this website comes up with is telling you you're going to mulligan 55% of 7-card hands, and this is the worst 7-card hand you're going to keep. Anything worse than this, you're going to send back. And the same is true of 6, 5, and 4. This is the worst 6-card hand you're going to keep, and you're going to mulligan 55%. So this is the output of the website, is this recommended mulligan strategy, and it's produced using the information available in the sort. We'll talk about that in detail later. If we click over to the final tab, it's kept hands. These are the hands you're going to end up keeping using the mulligan strategy described in the previous tab. And they're also sorted from worst to best, and they came out of the original sorted hands. So you scroll through, these are the hands you end up keeping. They're actually generated by starting with all the 7-card hands you had in the sort, and then mulliganing the ones that the algorithm recommends, and producing a random set of 6s and repeating that process. So the results are actually different every time the tab is loaded. So if you click on it, different results are going to show. All right, so if we go back to the deck list tab to actually work on entering our own deck list, the first thing we're going to do is clear. That gets rid of all the entries, and then you can use this text search to enter cards. You can click on them, or you can push enter. Either will input them. You can change the quantities down here, and the deck list number of cards in the deck is updated in the top left. If you reduce a card's quantity to 0, it's removed from the deck. You do in the card search, you have to enter the name starting in the beginning. So you can't, for instance, type bolt to find lightning bolt. You actually have to type lightning bolt. And that brings it up, and then it's entered. Alternatively, if we have a .deck list from something like MTG Top 8, we can actually load that. So if we go over here, let's get a Death Shadow list. We download this .deck file, which is in our downloads folder. If we go over back here, again, the deck list is cleared. We go load.deck. We go to our downloads folder. We can pull it out. And it populates. And so this is that Death Shadow list that we were just looking at. But for today's demonstration, we're going to use the default list that loads when you load the website, because I think everyone will be most familiar with it. So here we are back with the default list that came with the website. And that's how the deck list entry tool works. So we're going to move over to the sorted hands tool. This one lets you draw hands of random sizes and insert them into your deck. We'll start off demonstrating that by clearing the sort, and then we're going to draw a random 7-card hand. And because there's no other hands in the deck, it just inserts it. There's no other hands in the sort, it just inserts it first. If we draw another 7-card hand, this time it's going to ask which one's better. Looking at these two, it's kind of close, but I think this hand's better, actually. And it places it in the sort in the appropriate location. We can do it again. We're going to say this one's better, we're going to say this one's better again, and it places it again in the correct position in the sort. If you click a number of cards less than 7, it's first going to ask you to do the London mulligan and remove cards until only 6 remain. Here we're going to remove a mountain. Then it's going to ask you the same comparison tool. What it's doing is a binary search to find the position in the sort. And so if we load the page again with all 80, we're going to insert a hand into this, and we're going to find that a 7-card hand going into this sort only requires answering about 6 of these comparisons to find the position in the sort. So I think this hand is better. This hand is better. This hand is better, but it's very close. I actually think this hand is better. I think the second hand is better, although it's very close. And I again think the second hand is better. So after answering those 6 or 7 comparisons, it enters it into the sort in the appropriate location. And you see we have one more card in our sorted hands, one more 7-card hand. All right. So you may have noticed that the website has changed, and that's because I changed some of the features on it, and I reshot this video just to cover the features that I changed. The beginning half of the video is all that is still relevant. That's how those tools still work, but the analysis section has changed, and there's a new section called win percentage curve that the analysis section uses, and that's new. So if we click on the information tab, it's going to show an explanation of everything that the algorithm is doing to select which hands to keep and which hands to mulligan. I'm going to walk through that. The first assumption that this algorithm makes is it assigns a win percentage to every hand in the sort. And that's actually done with defaults under the win percentage curve tab. And the way it's currently done is it draws 5 hands out of the sort according to sort of evenly distributed percentile. So it draws the 0% hand, the 25% hand, 50, 75, and 100, which is, the worst hand in the sort, the best hand in the sort, and 3 in between. And then it asks you with these buttons to assign a win percentage to each of the hands. So you can edit these, and then it finds the win percentage of every other hand by linearly interpolating between these points based on its index in the sort. So a note about this: it comes with these defaults. The question you're trying to answer is what's the win percentage of each of these hands, which are random hands drawn from the deck of different sizes, against hands that your opponents will keep. So that's why many of the numbers are lower than 50%, is because these are just random hands, and your opponent's hands that they keep are much better than a random hand on average. I assign these values, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later. The algorithm's pretty robust and doesn't really heavily depend on exactly the values you choose, but you can tune it for different types of decks. A combo deck might have a higher win percentage on the high end and lower win percentage everywhere else, and a control deck that's just looking for a couple lands and a couple interaction pieces might have a more even curve. We can talk about that a little bit more later. So you can actually see, if you scroll down to the bottom of the analysis tab, the way the win percentage is assigned to each hand using the linear interpolation I talked about. So this is the first hand in the sort. That's the one we assigned a 10% win percentage to. And then the 25th percentile one is this 20th index, because there's 80 cards in the sort. And that's the one we assigned a 20% win percentage to. Just briefly, we'll look back at that. So 10, 20. And then for all the points in between those two, it sort of slowly varies from the 10% to 20%. It's called linear interpolation. And then it does the same thing for all the cards in the sort. And so you can see here the assigned win percentage, which of course we're sort of estimating as the user and is not an exact science. Nor is the linear interpolation method exact. But it's a good approximation. So then, using that information, what this algorithm does is it starts with the smallest hand you have, which would normally, if you had all hand sizes in the sort, it would be a one-card hand, but we don't have any ones, twos, or threes, so it assumes the win percentage for those is 0. And so it starts with 4. It calculates the average win percentage for all 4-card hands at 24%. And again, that's drawn from this list. It then decides it's going to keep all 4-card hands, because there are no 3-card hands to mulligan to, and assigns the average win percentage of keeps to the same 24%, because it's all the 4-card hands. And then we'll talk about this in a second, but it ends up being the same number. So then it calculates the mulligan rate for 4-card hands, which is 0%. As we mentioned, there's no 3s, it never mulligans. And then it moves on to the next hand size, which is 5-card. And what it does here is for every 5-card hand in this list, so here's the first one, I think, it checks to see the win percentage assigned with that 5-card hand. And if it's less than the average win percentage, including mulligans, or for the 4-card hand, it decides to mulligan it. So, and the reason it's doing that is because if it has a better chance of winning the game with an average 4, then it's going to choose to mulligan. And so it goes through for all the 5-card hands, and it does that. And then you see the choice on the last column here in this table. So again, here was the 5, 16.84 is less than 24, so it chooses to mulligan. And it continues to do that until, what was the number? 24.03, until one of the 5-card hands has a higher than 24% win percentage, and decides to keep that hand, and keeps all other hands because it just keeps increasing as you go down the list. So it can then calculate the win percentage of 5-card hands that it decides to keep as just the ones it keeps. And then it updates this last thing, which is the average win percentage of 5-card hands, including the times it chooses to mulligan to go to 4-card hands. And it does that as a weighted average, which is right here, it's a weighted average of the average win percentage of 5-card hands that keep and 4-card hands. And the weight is determined by the mulligan frequency, which is right here, which has also been calculated by this algorithm. So that's the process, and it just works its way up through the cards, up through the hands, because each one depends on the hand size smaller than it. So it starts at 1, 2, 3, 4, and goes through. And you'll see the results are actually pretty similar to the old method, if you're familiar with that. But these are the hands it picks out to. This is the worst hand of every hand size that it keeps. And so this is the method you're going to use when you try to implement these mulligans, because you're just going to compare every hand you have. If it's a 7-card hand, you'll compare it to this one. And if it's worse, you're going to mulligan, and if it's equal or better, you're going to keep. And you repeat that process with 6, 5, and 4 to implement this exact mulligan strategy. So yeah, that's how it works. You can read it here. Try to write it as clearly as possible, but there are a lot of steps. A little bit more about the win percentage curve. Again, it's set on this on this tab. It's fairly robust, and because this entire process is what's called linear, it actually only depends on the relative value of each of these win percentages. So, for example, if I do something like cut them all in half, it's actually going to produce exactly the same results because it's just a comparison of these values, and it doesn't actually use the specific value. So that yields exactly the same mulligan strategy with the same mulligan rates. I'm only showing that to demonstrate that it's pretty robust to that type of error. So they only have to be relatively correct. And even then, so if we sort of refresh the page to set them back to the defaults, if you modify these values down to really like flatten the curve so that more of the bad hand, the lower percentile hands are better and the upper percentile hands are worse, and sort of flatten this curve, if you will. It does change, actually in this case it did not change the results, but if you change them enough, it does change the results, but not a ton, which gives me a lot of confidence that this is a relatively robust algorithm. And that those, so here we go, we actually got to change. It's slightly changed which hand to mulligan there. That may just be the way this sort is set up, that it's a cleared line, sort of where the worst 7 is. But that gives me a lot of confidence that, you know, those numbers don't have to be that accurate for this method to produce good mulligan strategies. So other than that, that's how the analysis section works. If you tab over to the kept hands, this is just sort of a random selection of the hands you end up keeping. It has to generate it every time because that's the way a mulligan strategy works. It chooses, you know, all the 7 card, starts with all the 7 card hands, and then mulligans the ones that are worse, and gets random 6s and continues the process. So every time you click on that tab, it is different. So that's all for now. Thanks. Check out the website.